"You were never meant to love me," she said. His ring told another story. The rain had been falling since dusk, thin and silver like threads drawn through the air. It tapped against the window of Elora Wynn's small studio, where candlelight trembled over unfinished paintings and the scent of salt and turpentine hung heavy. She sat by the window, brush motionless in her hand, watching the sea move like a restless memory beyond the lass. Sinister? The old lighthouse stood in the distance, dark, forgotten, and yet somehow alive, as if waiting for someone to return. Tonight, the waves seemed to whisper her name. Elera had lived her whole life in Evermere, a town that always felt halfway between the living and the lost. Her mother's antique shop below was closed now, the open sign turned backward, and the only sound was the soft ticking of the clock that had belonged to her father. It had stopped at 11:03 the night he left and never started again. She could fix it, perhaps, but she never did. Outside, the ferry horn echoed across the bay. Few came to Evermere anymore, especially on a night like this. Elora's cat stirred on the windowsill, lifting its head as if sensing something new in the air. She followed its gaze. A figure stepping off the ferry, coat collar raised against the storm. A stranger, tall, moving with the quiet precision of someone who'd been here before. Before we begin this story, the narrator's voice seemed to murmur through the sound of rain, soft and close. Tell us, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now let's begin. Elora turned away from the window, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She had work to finish, an old photograph someone had asked her to restore. Its corners curled and faded. Two people stood in it, a man and a woman, smiling beside the very same lighthouse that now stood in ruin. She pressed her thumb gently against the man's face, as though smoothing away the years, but something about his eyes unsettled her. That same stillness, that same sadness she'd just seen at the pier. The doorbell below chimed. Once, twice. She hesitated, startled. It was nearly midnight, and no one ever came this late. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, she descended the narrow stairs to the shop. The bell jingled again before she reached the door. She opened it slowly. He was there, the man from the ferry, rain dripping from his coat, a small lantern in his hand. His eyes met hers, and for a heartbeat the world fell silent. He looked as though he recognized her, but couldn't place why. I'm sorry to call so late, he said, voice low, roughened by travel. They told me this is the only place in town that restores photographs. Elora nodded, her throat dry. You've come a long way for that. I suppose I have. He hesitated before adding, I'm Julian. Julian Roth. The name stirred something faint, a ripple through her memory she couldn't catch. She stepped aside and he entered. Careful, polite, the kind of man who carried his sadness quietly. He placed a small envelope on the counter. Inside was an old photograph, water-stained and creased. When she pulled it free, her breath caught. The lighthouse again, and in front of it, a woman whose face mirrored her own features almost perfectly, though older, smiling, eyes bright with life. That was my wife, Julian said softly. Clara. She died 5 years ago. Elora didn't look up right away. The photograph trembled slightly in her hand. And it's beautiful, she whispered. She used to say this place was where light meets memory. I didn't understand what she meant until she was gone. His gaze lifted toward the window, where the faint silhouette of the lighthouse loomed through rain. I've come back to rebuild it. It was hers once. The candle beside them flickered. Elora felt the air shift as if the sea had drawn a slow breath outside. There was something in his voice, not just grief, but recognition. And for reasons she couldn't explain, her pulse quickened. Then I'll restore this for you, she said quietly. The photo, I mean. He smiled faintly, though it never reached his eyes. Thank you. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. You live above the shop? Yes. He nodded once. Yes, he nodded once. It's strange, isn't it? I almost feel I've stood here before. She watched him disappear into the rain, his lantern a small star moving toward the darkness. When the door closed, she pressed her hand over her heart, the echo of his words still warm against her skin. She didn't know why, but something about him, his ring, the way he said her name without realizing he had, left her trembling. Upstairs, the clock on her wall ticked once, as though remembering itself. She turned the photograph toward the light again. The woman's smile seemed to fade, her painted eyes deepening into something almost alive. Elora shivered. She didn't believe in ghosts, but tonight she thought she could feel one breathing beside her. Outside, the lighthouse flickered faintly, just once, as though answering some forgotten call from the sea. and for the first time in years, Evermere wasn't entirely dark. Morning came to Evermere softly, the kind of pale dawn that carried the scent of wet earth and sea salt. The storm had passed, leaving behind a hush so deep that even the gulls seemed reluctant to cry. Elara awoke to the faint sound of footsteps outside her shop, deliberate, steady, familiar. She rose, tied her hair loosely, and stepped to the window. Below, Julian Roth stood near the edge of the street, looking toward the lighthouse as if waiting for it to speak to him. The light caught his hand, and for the first time, she noticed the ring. Silver, worn smooth by time, glinting faintly in the new day. By the time she opened the door, he was already walking toward her. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said, his tone softer than the night before. "I thought I'd check how the photograph was coming along." "It's drying," Elara replied, motioning toward her studio. "You can see it if you'd like." He followed her inside, glancing at the shelves lined with glass bottles and pressed flowers, the paintings of waves and sky. The photograph lay beneath the window, flattened under glass. The image had cleared, the woman's face sharper now, her smile more vivid. Julian stopped breathing for a moment as though the sight had struck something deep. "You brought her back," he whispered. Elara looked at him quietly. "It's what I do." He nodded, but his hand, the one with the ring, rested against the table, and she found her eyes drawn to it. The engraving caught a sliver of sunlight. 2 names etched delicately into the band. She couldn't help but read them aloud. Clara and Julian. Then she frowned, leaning closer. Beneath the second name, half faded and almost hidden by a scratch, was another line, or what looked like it. A curve of a letter. The ghost of another name beneath the first. Julian's fingers closed over the ring quickly as if protecting it. "It's an old thing," he said. She wanted it that way. Elara didn't press, but her curiosity lingered. "You said you came back to rebuild the lighthouse," she began carefully. "Oh, was it hers?" "In a way," he said, staring at the sea through the window. "She loved it more than she loved the world. She used to paint it every morning, always from the same spot, always at dawn." Said the light was different there. He smiled faintly, a memory flickering behind his eyes. "I promised I'd finish what she started. But I never thought coming back would feel like this." "Like what?" "I like standing inside a memory that isn't done with you yet." The words stayed in the air between them, soft and heavy. Elora wanted to ask more, but the sound of the harbor bell interrupted them. Distant, echoing across the bay, she turned toward it instinctively, and when she looked back, Julian had already begun to move toward the door. "Thank you for the photograph," he said. "I'll bring the payment later." She nodded, though he was already gone. Hours passed. The town slowly came alive, fishermen mending nets, shopkeepers sweeping water from their doorsteps. Elara busied herself with her brushes, trying to lose the uneasy weight Julian had left behind, but the image of his ring wouldn't leave her mind. 2 names, one fading, one new. By afternoon, Mi came by with coffee and that watchful look she always carried when her younger sister seemed lost in thought. "Who was that man leaving this morning?" she asked. "A customer," Elara said, too quickly. Mi raised a brow. "Any customer who looked at you like you'd stepped out of a dream? Be careful, Elara. I've seen that look before." Elara smiled faintly. "You think every man is trouble." "Not every man," Mi replied, setting the cups down. "Just the ones who wear wedding rings they can't let go of." Elara's heart skipped. She said nothing, only turned to the window again where the lighthouse shimmered faintly through fog. The sound of waves drifted through the silence, slow and rhythmic, like breathing. That evening, as the sky bled into dusk, she decided to walk down to the pier. The sea was calm, the air touched with brine and lavender. She found Julian standing near the edge, blueprints rolled beneath his arm, steadying the lighthouse through a pair of field glasses. He lowered them when he heard her approach. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said. "We live here," she replied softly. "It's the rest of the world that feels far away." He smiled faintly at that, then gestured toward the horizon. She always wanted to rebuild it. Said light could heal what time destroyed. His hand brushed the ring absently. I thought I understood what she meant. But now, he hesitated, his eyes finding hers. "And now I'm not sure if I came back for her. Or for something I can't name." The wind stirred between them, carrying the scent of salt and fading rain. Elara wanted to tell him about the way the sea seemed to change color when she thought of him, how something about his voice felt like a forgotten song. But the words stayed caught behind her lips. Instead, she said quietly, "And maybe it's not about rebuilding what was lost. Maybe it's about finding what's still left. He looked at her for a long moment and the world seemed to still. Then he nodded once, as if the truth in her words hurt and healed him all at once. When she turned to leave, he called after her. "Alara." She paused. "I can't explain it, but when I saw you at the shop, it felt like I'd known you before. Do you believe in that kind of thing?" Her heartbeat fluttered, fragile as candlelight. "I used to," she said. "And maybe I will again." He smiled, a brief broken thing, and slipped his hand into his coat pocket. The ring glinted once under the falling light, 2 names catching the sun before vanishing into shadow. By the time Ilara reached the top of the hill, night had settled again over Evermere. From her window, she watched him still standing there at the pier, a lone figure framed by the sea, and she realized something quietly terrifying. That even from this distance, she could see the way his hand trembled when he touched that ring, as though it carried not one story, but 2. The next morning began with the slow hush of rain, the kind that softened every sound until even footsteps felt like whispers. Ilara stood by the window of her shop, watching droplets trace silver paths down the glass. The sea beyond blurred into a gray sheet, the lighthouse barely visible through the mist. She had always loved this kind of weather. It made the world quieter, more honest somehow. Yet today, something about it unsettled her. Perhaps it was the memory of Julian's voice, the way he'd said her name like a secret he'd once known. She spent the early hours restoring another photograph, one that a local fisherman had brought by weeks ago, but her mind was in it. Each stroke of the brush seemed to drift back to the image of that ring, 2 names, one fading. She tried to shake the thought away, telling herself it wasn't her story to wonder about. But when the bell above the door chimed softly, her heart betrayed her with how quickly it leapt. Julian stepped inside, rain clinging to his coat, his hair damp against his forehead. He looked out of place in the little shop, too composed, too haunted. "The harbor office told me you might have old glass," he said, holding a small list. "For the lighthouse restoration. Original pieces, if you have any." Ilara motioned for him to follow. "The storage room's in the back. You might find something that fits." They passed through a narrow corridor lined with portraits and seashell frames. The smell of salt and varnish filled the air. Ilara knelt beside a crate, pulling out panes of varying sizes, their surfaces fogged with dust and time. "Most of these came from the old inn before it closed," she explained. Julian took one in his hands, turning it gently under the light. The rain outside struck the roof in a soft rhythm, like a heartbeat. "You can almost hear it," he murmured. "Hear what?" "The past," he said, pressing his thumb against the glass, like it's still speaking through what's left. Ilara smiled faintly. "You sound like someone who doesn't believe anything ever really ends." They looked at her then, eyes thoughtful, distant. "And maybe I don't. Not anymore." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the rain the only voice between them. She watched him, the way he traced his fingers along the edge of the glass, the way he seemed to listen to something she couldn't hear. There was a gentleness to him that didn't quite hide the sorrow beneath. When he finally spoke again, it was so quietly, she almost missed it. "Clara used to love days like this," he said. She'd sit by the window, painting the reflection of the rain. Said every drop carried a different memory. Ilara's hand stilled over the crate. "You talk about her like she's still here." He hesitated. "Sometimes I think she is. Or maybe I'm just afraid to admit she's not." The honesty in his voice made her chest ache. She wanted to tell him that she understood, that she too lived among ghosts, though hers had no names. But instead, she simply reached for another pane, holding it up to the light. "This one's clean," she said softly. "No cracks." He took it from her carefully, their fingers brushing. The touch was brief but electric, enough to pull the air tight between them. His gaze met hers, steady but unreadable. "You've got paint on your hands," he said, almost absently. She laughed quietly. "It never really washes off." Julian smiled, though only for a moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small folded paper, a sketch. This was hers, he said, offering it to her. The lines were delicate, drawn in soft charcoal. It was the lighthouse, yes, but beside it stood a woman. The same woman from the photograph, with windswept hair and a gaze turned toward the horizon. Ilara's breath caught. She drew beautifully. She did, he agreed. But this one was unfinished. "I found it in her studio after..." He trailed off, voice roughened by the memory. "I thought maybe if the lighthouse light shines again, I could finish what she started." Ilara traced the edge of the paper with her fingertip. Maybe that's why you came back. Maybe that's why you came back. Maybe, he said. Then, quieter, or maybe I came back for something I didn't know I'd lost. The rain grew heavier, blurring the windows. The sound wrapped around them like a heartbeat, steady and unending. Elara set the sketch aside and handed him a bundle of glass panes wrapped in cloth. These should do, she said, the light. He nodded, accepting them with care. Thank you, Elara. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You always say my name like you said it before. Julian froze, then looked down at the ring on his hand. His thumb brushed over the engraving unconsciously, as though hiding something again. Maybe I have, he murmured. In another time, he left soon after, stepping into the rain. Elara remained by the door long after he disappeared from sight, her pulse still echoing in her ears. She turned back to the sketch on the table, the unfinished lighthouse, the woman by the sea, and for the first time noticed something she hadn't before. In the corner, faint but visible, was a second signature beside Clara's. The ink had faded with time, but one word remained. Elara. Her breath trembled, the rain outside striking harder against the glass, as if the world itself had just remembered something long forgotten. The rain had quieted by nightfall, leaving the streets slick with reflections of lantern light. Elara sat at her work table, the sketch still beside her. The name, her own faded but undeniable, had been haunting her all evening. She couldn't remember ever meeting Clara Roth, much less sharing a signature with her, yet something in her chest pulsed with an ache that felt older than memory. When Winnie came by to lock the shop doors, Elara barely noticed. Her sister's voice echoed faintly from the stairwell. Don't stay up too late. The storm's coming back tomorrow. The air grew colder with each step, thick with dust and the faint scent of cedar. She hadn't been up there in years, since before her mother passed, before silence had settled over the house like a second roof. The bulb overhead flickered weakly when she pulled the chain. Boxes were stacked in crooked towers, old furniture draped in sheets. The floor creaked beneath her as she moved toward a trunk she remembered from childhood. A heavy thing with brass corners and a faded sticker that once read Evermere, Evermere in. Kneeling beside it, she brushed away a layer of dust and lifted the lid. Inside lay old linen, a few of her mother's keepsakes, and beneath them, a small wooden box wrapped in lace that had yellowed with time. Something about it felt deliberate, hidden. Her fingers trembled as she undid the knot. Inside were letters, at least a dozen folded neatly, each sealed with wax that had long since cracked. The paper was thin, brittle, the ink a shade of blue gone nearly gray. On the topmost envelope, written in graceful cursive, was a name she recognized instantly. Julian Roth. Her breath caught. She looked through the rest, each one addressed to him, all signed by the same hand. Clara. She sat there for a long moment, her pulse steady but heavy in her ears. Why were Clara's letters here in her attic? She unfolded the first one carefully, afraid it might crumble. The writing was soft, uneven, like the words of someone writing through tears. My dearest Julian, if you ever return to Evermere, promise me you'll look for the light, not the shadow. The sea has a way of taking things it means to keep, but I believe love can still find its way back, if you let it. The next line was smudged, the ink blurred as though touched by rain. There's someone here who will need you when I'm gone. She doesn't know it yet, but she carries what I cannot finish. When you see her, you'll understand. Elara's fingers stilled. The attic felt suddenly smaller, the air thinner. She read the rest in silence, her eyes moving faster, though her mind could hardly keep pace. The later letters grew shorter, weaker. Clara's handwriting trembled, her words filled with longing and resignation. In one, she mentioned the lighthouse, how its light had gone out the night before her illness worsened. If I cannot come back to finish what I began, perhaps she will. I see her face when I close my eyes. I do not know why. It comforts me. Elara closed the letter, her hands shaking. The sound of rain began again on the roof, soft but insistent, like a memory pressing to be heard. She rose and looked around the attic, her gaze falling on a stack of old canvases leaning against the wall. She pulled one free, brushing away the dust. A painting emerged, unfinished, the strokes delicate but precise. It was the lighthouse, its light unlit, the sea around it restless and gray, and in the lower corner, barely visible, were two small initials. CR beneath them, faint but real, another set EW. Her breath trembled as she stepped back, the room seeming to tilt around her. Two signatures again. Two women connected by something she couldn't name. Clara and Elara. A sound startled her. The attic door creaked open below. She froze, listening. The clock downstairs struck 11. Then came a soft knock against the front door of the shop. She hesitated, heart racing, then moved quietly to the window overlooking the street. Through the fogged glass, she saw him, Julian, standing in the rain, coat dark with water, his hand pressed against the doorframe as though he'd come seeking shelter, or something he'd lost. Alara's breath caught. The letters felt heavy in her hands, the paper whispering like a warning. She didn't move. After a moment, Julian stepped back, his head bowed. His hand brushed his ring, the faint glint of silver catching the lamplight before he turned and disappeared into the mist. She sank to her knees beside the trunk, clutching the letters to her chest. The storm deepened outside, thunder rolling over the sea. In the flickering attic light, she read the last line of Clara's final letter again, over and over, until the words seemed to blur with her tears. If love finds her first, do not fear it. It is still mine, only changed. Alara closed her eyes. The rain fell harder, the sound echoing through the old glass windows below as though the past itself were weeping. And somewhere far off, through the haze of storm and time, the faint light of the lighthouse flickered once more, like a heartbeat remembering its rhythm. The storm broke by morning, leaving Evermere washed clean beneath a pale, forgiving sun. The air smelled of salt and lilies, and ribbons of mist clung to the rooftops like the last traces of a dream. Alara hadn't slept. The letters still lay open across her work table, their fragile pages fluttering in the soft draft from the window. Every line seemed to echo inside her, threads of connection forming where reason could find none. She told herself she should burn them, forget them, but something deep within whispered that they were meant for her. The town, meanwhile, stirred with anticipation. It was the day of the Lantern Festival, a tradition older than anyone could remember, when the people of Evermere released light into the sky to honor those they'd lost and those they still hoped to find. For years, Alara had avoided it, but today she found herself drawn to it, perhaps because of the letters or perhaps because of the man who had come seeking light in the ruins of the past. Me arrived just after noon, arms full of paper lanterns and warnings. You look pale, she said, setting the bundle down. Joe, please tell me you're not going to that festival tonight. Alara hesitated. Maybe I am. Me gave a weary sigh. You're thinking about him, aren't you? The man with the ring. Alara didn't answer. Her eyes lingered on the window where the sea shimmered faintly beyond the rooftops. He came last night, she said softly. He didn't know I saw him. He looked lost. Then let him stay lost. Me said gently but firmly. A man who chase ghosts will only make you one. But Alara's thoughts had already drifted elsewhere, to Clara's words, the ones written in trembling ink. If love finds her first, do not fear it. It felt like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. By evening, the town square filled with light. Lanterns lined the harbor walls, their soft glow mirrored in the water. Children ran between the stalls, faces painted gold and white, laughter mingling with the faint music that floated from the docks. Alara walked slowly among them, a single lantern held in her hands. It was plain, cream paper, thin string, but on its surface, she'd painted a small lighthouse, its beams stretching into the dark. She didn't see Julian at first. But when the crowd thinned near the pier, she spotted him standing by the water's edge, holding a lantern of his own. His coat was unbuttoned, his hair tousled by the sea breeze. He looked up when he sensed her. And for a moment, neither spoke. The world around them seemed to fade until only the sound of waves remained. You came, he said finally, voice low, almost surprised. So did you. As she stepped closer, the lantern light soft against her face. I thought you didn't believe in rituals like this. He smiled faintly. Clara did. She said lanterns are promises the sea can't drown. Alara's gaze flicked to the small flame inside his lantern. Who's yours for? He hesitated, the muscles in his jaw tightening. For the same person it's always been, he said quietly. But maybe. Also for someone else now. The words settled between them, tender and uncertain. Alara wanted to ask what he meant, but instead she looked toward the horizon, where dozens of lanterns were already rising. Soft lights drifting upward, carrying names and wishes into the sky. Together they knelt by the water, lighting their lanterns from the same small flame. She whispered her wish before letting go. For the ones we lost, she said softly. Julian's voice joined hers, quiet as a prayer, and the ones we never truly found. Their lanterns rose side by side, the two small flames merging briefly before drifting apart into the night. For a moment, it looked as though the light from hers reached back to touch his again, stubbornly refusing to separate. Separate. When she turned to him, his gaze was already fixed on her, searching, uncertain, yet filled with something she couldn't name. You remind me of her, he said suddenly. And not just in how you look, but how you are. The way you move, the way you listen. Ilara's heart stilled. You shouldn't say that. I know, he said, his voice breaking slightly, but I can't help it. The music from the festival swelled behind them, the distant laughter of children blending with the soft hum of waves. He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the raindrop scars on his ring. The engraving caught the lantern light again, and for an instant she thought she saw the faint line beneath the names, that hidden mark she hadn't been sure of before. Her breath trembled. Julian, where did that ring come from? He looked down at it, thumb brushing over the faded letters. It was hers, he said. Clara's. She had it made before she died. Said she wanted it to remind me that love isn't supposed to end. But there are two names, Ilara said. Clara and? He frowned slightly, as if trying to remember something that had been lost. The engraving's worn. I never could make out what the second name was supposed to be. Maybe a mistake. Or maybe she didn't want me to know. The words struck her like a chill. She opened her mouth to speak, to tell him about the letters, about the sketches, about the shared signatures, but the words wouldn't come. Just wouldn't come. Instead, she watched as the reflection of their lanterns rippled across the water, fragile and fleeting. When he finally looked at her again, his expression had changed, softer yet distant. You feel it too, don't you? Don't you? Don't you? He asked quietly. At this familiarity, she nodded barely. It's like I'm remembering something I never lived. He stepped closer still, his voice just above a whisper. Maybe that's what love really is. For a long moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, as if sensing how close they'd come to something dangerous, the wind rose and scattered the last of the lanterns into the clouds. The light broke apart, and the night returned to its silence. Julian exhaled, turning away. Turning away. I should go, he said. The lighthouse waits. Ilara didn't move. She watched him walk down the pier until he disappeared into the mist, his lantern's faint glow fading behind him. The sea was calm again, the tide retreating, leaving her reflection alone in the water. And just behind it, faint as moonlight, the reflection of another woman's face, watching her with a sad, knowing smile. Ilara blinked, and it was gone. The following days passed in a strange, fragile rhythm, sunlight and silence, the sea breathing against the rocks, and the ghost of a feeling that neither Ilara nor Julian could quite name. The festival had ended, but its afterglow lingered in Evermere. Stray lanterns still floated in the bay, dim stars drifting just above the water, reminders of wishes that refused to fade. Ilara tried to return to her routine, but she couldn't escape the pull of what she had seen. The engraving on Julian's ring, the letters hidden in her attic, the reflection she could swear had smiled back at her from the water. She avoided the attic now, though its presence pressed at her mind like a pulse. At night she lay awake, the sound of waves filling her small apartment above the shop, carrying fragments of memory she could not place. A woman's laughter, a voice calling her name in the wind, the faint scent of paint and salt. On the third day, Julian appeared again. The bell over the door rang softly, and there he was, shoulders damp with sea spray, a quiet uncertainty in his eyes. He looked as though he'd spent the night walking the shoreline. I came to return the glass, he said, placing a wrapped bundle on the counter. The pieces you gave me, they fit perfectly. Ilara nodded, though her voice caught before she could reply. That's good. I'm glad. He studied her face, as though sensing the distance that had formed since the festival. You haven't been down to the pier, he said. The lighthouse is nearly whole again. I know, she said softly. I've seen the light from my window at night. He smiled faintly. It's not steady yet. The wiring's old. It flickers sometimes like it's remembering how to shine. His eyes lingered on her then. You haven't been sleeping? Ilara looked away. You shouldn't say that. I only said what I see. She led him upstairs to the small kitchen that overlooked the sea. The window pane still held the faint outline of rain, a pattern of dried drops that caught the afternoon light like a memory etched in glass. The kettle whistled softly, and the rhythm of the waves below filled the silences between their words. You said Clara used to paint. Ilara began carefully. Did she ever paint the lighthouse? He looked up from his cup. Every day, until the last. She said it was her way of keeping the light alive. At 10, his thumb traced the rim of the porcelain absently. You remind me of how she used to be before she fell ill. Quiet, but full of questions. Ilara froze. And you keep seeing her when you look at me, she said. Not as a question but a truth. Julian's jaw tightened. I'm sorry, I don't mean to. I don't mean to. It's just that I look like her. He nodded slowly. Too much sometimes. The words stung more than she expected. Elora turned toward the window, her reflection framed against the pale light. And maybe that's why you came here, she said quietly. And not for the lighthouse. Not for the lighthouse. Not for the past. But because he wanted to see her again. Julian didn't answer. The silence spoke for him. She faced him, her voice trembling but steady. I found something, Julian, in my attic. Letters addressed to you, from Clara. His eyes widened, the color draining from his face. What did you say? I wasn't looking for them, she said quickly. They were hidden in an old box with paintings, her paintings. One of them signed by her and by me. Or at least by someone with my name. He rose from his chair, running a hand through his hair as if to steady himself. That's impossible. Clara never... He stopped mid-sentence, his voice breaking. No. She burned everything before she died. Every letter, every canvas. She didn't want to be remembered by what she left undone. But then why are they here? Elora asked softly. Why would she write to you about someone she'd never met? Someone she said you'd need when she was gone? Julian stared at her, and in his eyes was a flicker of something fragile. Not disbelief, but recognition. He stepped closer. What exactly did she say? Elora hesitated, then repeated the line that had haunted her most. There's someone here who will need you when I'm gone. She doesn't know it yet, but she carries what I cannot finish. For a long moment, neither moved. The clock on the wall ticked faintly, each sound stretching the silence tighter. Julian's gaze drifted to the window where a pale reflection of both their faces shimmered against the glass, two silhouettes blurred together. She used to talk like that, he whispered. Like she knew something I didn't. Said time wasn't linear. That love bends it, stretches it, it. Elora felt her pulse quicken. Do you think she meant me? I don't know, he said. But if she did... His voice faltered. Then maybe all this, the letters, the lighthouse, us, isn't coincidence. He turned then, his hand brushing hers where it rested on the table. The touch was light, almost uncertain, but enough to pull a shiver from her. She didn't pull away. The sound of the sea filled the room again, steady, eternal, as if it too were listening. But just as quickly, he withdrew his hand, stepping back as though the moment had frightened him. You can't, he said quietly. It isn't fair to you. To me? She asked, her voice barely a breath. To see someone else when I look at you, he said. To love the shadow of someone I already lost. The words cut through her like cold air. She wanted to speak, to tell him he was wrong, that what was happening between them wasn't a shadow but something new, fragile and real. But before she could find the words, he was already at the door, his coat in his hands. Elora, he said, his voice low and pained. Maybe this was never meant to happen. Then he was gone, leaving the room trembling with silence. Elora stood by the window long after, watching the light from the lighthouse flicker faintly through the fog. Its glow pulsed unevenly, fighting the dark until it steadied at last, one final, fragile flame holding against the night. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, her face pale, her eyes glistening, but behind her, faint and fleeting, she thought she saw another figure standing in the reflection. A woman with the same eyes, the same half-smile, watching her with quiet understanding. When she turned, there was no one there. Only the sound of the sea, and the echo of his words lingering in the air like a promise she hadn't asked for but could no longer ignore. The morning after Julian left was eerily quiet, as though the sea itself had decided to hold its breath. Evermere woke slowly beneath a pale sky, the gulls wheeling lazily over the harbor, the tide dragging its sleepy rhythm along the shore. Elora moved through her shop in silence, every creak of the floorboards echoing the heaviness in her chest. The night had stolen more than her sleep. It had taken the fragile balance she had been clinging to. She tried to focus on work, to lose herself in the soft rhythm of her brushes, but even the scent of paint couldn't drown out the thoughts that circled endlessly in her mind. The image of Julian's face as he turned away, the tremor in his voice when he'd said, maybe this was never meant to happen. It lingered like a bruise beneath her ribs. She wanted to hate him for leaving, but what she felt instead was something worse. Understanding, worse, because part of her knew that he was right. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something vital was missing, a truth she was meant to find. The letters, the paintings, the reflections in the glass, they all pointed toward something buried beneath the surface, something Clara had left behind. Late that afternoon, Mia arrived unannounced, carrying a basket of bread and that familiar look of quiet disapproval. You've barely eaten, she said, setting the basket down. The lighthouse stood faintly in the distance, its new glass glinting under the dull sun. That man, he's still working out there, isn't he? Allura nodded. The light's steady now. Mee hesitated, then lowered her voice. There's something you should know about that place. Allura looked up sharply. About the lighthouse? Mee's expression shifted, a mix of worry and reluctance. It's not just a lighthouse. Not anymore. The keeper. Old Mr. Havelock, he told me something years ago, after the night of the storm that took Clara Roth. He said she wasn't the only one who disappeared that night. 'Twas proud, that night. A chill rippled through Allura. What do you mean? Mee sat down, her voice hushed. There was a girl. Young, maybe your age then. She worked for Clara, helped her with her paintings. No one remembers her name now, but people said she vanished after Clara's death. Before his death, they thought she left town, but Havelock swore she was there in the lighthouse that night. Said he saw her go in after Clara and never come out. Allura's breath faltered. Why didn't anyone tell me this before? Mee looked uneasy. Maybe because no one wanted to talk about it. The sea took too many things that year. People stopped asking questions. But if you're getting close to that man, you need to be careful. Some stories are better left in the dark. Allura tried to respond, but her words caught in her throat. Oh, the thought of another woman, a nameless girl who had worked for Clara, who had vanished without a trace, sent a strange shiver through her. It was as if a missing piece of herself had just shifted in the dark, waiting to be found. That evening, when the last light drained from the sky, she walked toward the harbor. The path to the lighthouse wound along the cliffs, narrow and damp with sea spray. The air was sharp, the wind tasting of salt and distance. The lighthouse rose ahead, its restored glass catching the final traces of sunset. Julian was there, just as she knew he would be, standing near the base with his coat unbuttoned, his face turned toward the waves. Tinor. The moment he saw her, his expression tightened. Surprise, then something softer, something like regret. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. I needed to see you, Allura replied. Her voice was steady, but her heart wasn't. You left before I could tell you everything. He turned away, gazing out over the sea. There's nothing left to say. There is, she insisted. There's something you don't know about that night, the night Clara died, that made him look at her. Oh, what are you talking about? Allura stepped closer, her voice barely above the wind. Mee told me about another woman, someone who worked with Clara, who was there the night she died. The lighthouse keeper saw her go inside and never come out. Julian's eyes darkened. That's not true, he said, though his tone wavered. Clara was alone that night. I know she was. He stopped, closing his eyes as if fighting off an old memory. She wrote to me before the storm, said she was tired, that she couldn't paint anymore. I didn't believe her. I should have gone to her. But when I arrived, it was too late. Allura hesitated. Julian, the girl, whoever she was, she might not have died. Maybe she survived. Maybe she's still what? He asked sharply. Still waiting. Still haunting the place where everything ended? He shook his head, his voice breaking. The sea doesn't give back what it takes. Allura. She looked at him, her heart aching for the pain behind his words. Maybe not. But sometimes it leaves pieces behind. The wind rose suddenly, rattling the lanterns along the path. The lighthouse light flickered once, then steadied, its beam cutting through the fog. For a moment, they both turned toward it. And in that light, Allura saw something strange through the glass window near the top. A faint figure. A woman's silhouette, motionless, watching. Julian followed her gaze, his breath catching. It can't be, he whispered. But when they blinked, the figure was gone. Allura's pulse quickened. Julian, who kept the lighthouse after Clara died, he swallowed hard. Havelock for a while. But before him, he hesitated. But before him, it was Clara. She used to keep it running at night, so the light helped her sleep. Allura looked up at the tower, her voice trembling. And then, maybe the light was never just hers. Maybe someone else was trying to keep it lit too. The wind howled through the cliffs, carrying the sound of the waves crashing below. Julian reached out suddenly, his hand finding hers. His grip was firm, desperate. Allura, whatever this is, whatever you think it means, don't go looking for answers in that place. Some lights were meant to go out. She didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the flickering beam above, and in its pale glow, she could almost hear it. The faint hum of something alive inside the walls. A heartbeat slow and steady, pulsing in time with the sea. and for the first time she wondered if the lighthouse was keeping more than memories. The night deepened over Evermere, carrying with it a restless wind that swept across the cliffs and filled the air with the scent of salt and memory. The lighthouse's beam carved through the fog, circling the dark sea like a weary guardian. Julian stood alone at its base long after Elira had gone home, her words echoing in his mind. Maybe someone else was trying to keep it lit, too. He had wanted to dismiss it, to tell himself that the figure they'd seen through the glass was a trick of light, a shadow caught between lightning and fear. But the image clung to him, as vivid as the night he'd last seen Clara alive. Seen Clara alive. The sound of her voice in the storm, the flash of her lantern through the rain. It haunted him still. He climbed the spiral staircase slowly, the iron steps groaning beneath his boots. The air inside the tower was cold and damp, heavy with the scent of old salt and oil. You wet. When he reached the top, the lantern chamber glowed dimly with its steady golden light. The glass panes shimmered with the reflection of the waves below. He rested a hand against the railing, his breath uneven. Clara, he whispered, the name slipping from his lips before he could stop it. If you're still here, tell me why, only the sea answered, a distant roar that rose and fell like the rhythm of grief. He stayed there until dawn brushed the horizon in pale silver, then descended, his eyes hollow from sleeplessness. Across the bay, Elira sat by her window, watching the same horizon. The storm clouds from the previous night lingered low over the water, their edges tinged pink by morning light. She hadn't told Julian everything. Not about the last of Clara's letters, the one she hadn't been able to open yet. It still lay on her desk, sealed with the same cracked wax as the others. She ran her fingers over the envelope now, tracing the faint, uneven writing. Her hand trembled as she broke the seal. The letter inside was short, its ink faded by time, but the words were sharp enough to cut through her breath. Julian thinks I'm fading because of the sea, but he's wrong. It isn't taking me, it's calling me back. There's something in it I can't turn away from, something that knows my name in ways he never could. If I disappear, tell him I wasn't afraid. I was remembering, and if she ever finds this, tell her the light is hers now. The paper slipped from Ilara's hand. Here, her heart pounded, her breath coming shallow. If she ever finds this, the words struck her like a bell. Clara had written the letter to someone. To her. But how could that be? She hadn't even known Clara when she was alive. At least, she didn't remember knowing her. The floor creaked below. Mia's footsteps. Elira hurried to hide the letter under a stack of sketches. Her sister entered, her brow furrowed. You were out late again? Mia said. I saw the light from your window. Elira nodded faintly. I couldn't sleep. Mia studied her face. You're pale. Is this about him again? No, Elira said too quickly. It's about the lighthouse. Mia's voice softened. You keep going there as if you're looking for something. Maybe it's time to stop. Elira forced a small smile. I think it's too late for that. By evening, the sea had turned restless again, its waves striking the cliffs with renewed force. Elira walked the path to the lighthouse. Her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. The wind whipped at her hair, carrying with it the faint hum of the sea, a sound that almost seemed to form words if she listened closely enough. When she reached the tower, she found the door slightly ajar. Inside, Julian stood by the spiral stairs, a lantern in his hand. Cho. His expression changed when he saw her. Relief, disbelief, something in between. You shouldn't be here, he said, echoing the words he'd once spoken before. And neither should you, she replied softly. He almost smiled. I couldn't stay away. Every time the light turns, I swear I see her face in the glass. Elira stepped closer. Maybe she's not asking you to see her. Maybe she's asking you to let her go. Julian looked at her then, his eyes searching hers as though her words had come from somewhere deeper than either of them understood. You sound like her, he said quietly. And maybe that's because she wanted me too, Elira said. I found another letter, Julian. She wrote about the sea, how it wasn't taking her, it was calling her back. She wasn't afraid. He shook his head slowly, the light flickering across his face. I tried to save her, he whispered. The night she died, I ran down to the shore. The waves were higher than the rocks. I saw her standing at the edge with her lantern. I called her name, but she didn't turn. She just stepped forward, and then she was gone. His voice broke. The sea took her. Elira's breath trembled. Maybe she didn't drown, Julian. Maybe she became what she always was, light. Maybe that's why it flickers when we speak her name. He looked up toward the beacon, its golden beam sweeping through the mist. A light doesn't remember people, Elira, doesn't it? she asked softly. Then why does it always find its way back to the shore? For a long time, neither spoke. The wind howled through the open door, scattering droplets of rain across the stone floor. Elara stepped closer, her hand brushing his sleeve. You have to forgive her, she whispered. Or she'll never rest. Julian's throat tightened. And what if I can't? Then forgive yourself, she said. She wouldn't want you to stay in the dark. Something in his eyes broke then, a grief that had been locked too long finally spilling over. He reached for her hand, gripping it tightly as the sound of thunder rolled over the cliffs. Outside, the waves rose higher, their spray striking the windows of the tower. Elara turned toward the light again, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. But just behind it, for the briefest second, another reflection shimmered there too. A woman, her face serene, her eyes filled with calm. Clara, the beam flickered once, twice, then steadied, brighter than before. Before. Julian saw it too, his breath caught, his hand trembling around Elara's. Do you see her? He whispered. Elara nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. She's not lost, she said. She never was, she said. She never was. Outside, the storm reached its peak, the sea roaring as though in acknowledgement. And as the two of them stood beneath the light, the past and present folded together, two hearts still tethered by the same current, two lives caught in the space between love and letting go. When the storm finally began to fade, the sea grew calm again, as if exhaling. The lighthouse beam swept slowly across the horizon, casting its light far out over the waves, guiding no ships, only memories home. The days that followed the storm blurred into one another. Pale skies, salt-sweet air, and the distant rhythm of waves that no longer frightened the town. The lighthouse stood tall again, its beam steady against the horizon. But within Evermere, whispers had begun to stir. They spoke of strange lights at night, of the painter and the architect seen walking the cliffs together, of the dead woman whose name still lingered between them. Elara felt it every time she stepped into the square. The glances, the murmurs. She'd never cared for gossip, but now, with Julian avoiding the shop and the letters still tucked away beneath her floorboards, she carried the weight of silence like a secret she didn't know how to bear. Prue. Me was the first to say what others only hinted. You've let yourself become part of his sorrow, she said one evening, her voice sharp, though her eyes betrayed worry. You think you're helping him heal, but he's only remembering through you. Elara looked away. You don't understand. You understand more than you think, me replied. He's still in love with a ghost, and you're standing in her shadow. The words cut deep. Elara said nothing. She only turned toward the window, where the fading light from the lighthouse blinked faintly through the mist. Sometimes, she said after a moment, the shadow is all that's left of the light. Me sighed, her anger softening into sorrow. Then what happens when it disappears again? That night, the rain returned. Light at first, then heavier, like the sea had found its voice again. Elara couldn't sleep. The sound of it against her window felt restless, urgent. Somewhere beyond the fog, she knew Julian was awake too, pacing the empty halls of the lighthouse. His thoughts caught between what was gone and what remained. She wrapped herself in her shawl and made her way through the wet streets, her shoes slipping on the cobblestones slick with rain. The tide was high, the cliffs dark with spray. When she reached the lighthouse, the door was already open, the faint smell of oil and sea filling the stairwell. Julian stood at the top, near the lantern, the morning light falling across his face. He looked tired, older somehow, as though the sea had taken something from him too. When he saw her, he didn't move. You shouldn't have come, he said quietly. You always say that, she replied, breathless from the climb. And yet I always do. He almost smiled, but it faded before it reached his eyes. They're talking in town, he said. About us. About Clara. About what they think is happening here. Elara stepped closer. I'll let them talk. It's not that simple. He turned toward the window, his reflection fractured by the glass. He came here to rebuild what she loved, not to destroy what's left of her memory. Elara's voice trembled. And what if rebuilding it means remembering the truth? He looked at her sharply. The truth. The truth is that she's gone, Elara said, her hands tightening around the railing. And you're still living as if you can bring her back. You keep chasing her through me, through this place. But the past doesn't live here anymore. Julian's jaw clenched. You think I don't know that? His voice rose, echoing through the chamber. You think I don't see her every time I close my eyes? You think I haven't tried to let her go? He turned toward her fully now, his eyes fierce and wet. You don't understand what it's like to lose everything that made you who you are. Elara's breath hitched. And you don't understand what it's like to be seen as someone you're not, she whispered. Every time you look at me, I feel her standing between us. He flinched at her words, as though she'd struck him. The silence that followed was sharp, filled only by the hum of the sea wind against the glass. Finally, he spoke, quieter this time. I never meant to hurt you, Elora. Then stop, she said, her voice breaking. Stop pretending you can love me while you're still reaching for her. He turned away, unable to meet her eyes. For a moment, it seemed neither would speak again. And then, without looking back, he said, Maybe I was wrong to come here at all. The words shattered something in her. Julian, but he was already descending the stairs, his footsteps heavy, echoing down into the hollow of the tower. Elora followed, her tears blurring the edges of light and shadow, but by the time she reached the bottom, the door was open and the wind had swallowed his figure whole. She stood there in the doorway, the rain soaking her sleeves, the sea stretching endlessly before her. The lighthouse beam turned above her head, casting its slow circle over the cliffs, catching the waves in flashes of gold and silver. Each turn felt like a heartbeat, fading. She walked down to the rocks where the tide lapped at her feet, cold and unyielding. The waves hissed around her ankles, whispering fragments of voices she couldn't quite understand. Clara's perhaps, or her own. She thought of the letters again, of Clara's final words. If love finds her first, do not fear it. It is still mine, only changed. The sea roared and the rain blurred everything into a single color. The gray of grief, the white of surrender. Elora closed her eyes, letting the wind pull at her hair, the cold press against her skin. For a moment, she felt as if she might dissolve into it, become one with the water and the sky, where all things that are lost eventually meet. Behind her, the lighthouse beam turned once more, steady and indifferent, its light sweeping over the dark, endless sea. And when she finally turned back toward it, she realized the beam no longer shone through two shadows, but only one. The rain had stopped by morning, but Evermere still felt heavy with it, the air damp and cold as though the sea had exhaled through every crack in the town. Elora sat by her window, her hands wrapped around a cup of untouched tea. The night replayed over and over in her mind. Julian's words, his footsteps fading down the lighthouse stairs, the way the wind had swallowed everything she wanted to say. She had not gone after him. She didn't know if she could have. Below her, the shop remained dark. Mia had come earlier, knocking softly before letting herself in, but Elora hadn't answered. There was nothing she could say that wouldn't sound hollow. The silence was safer. It was familiar. When she finally rose, her reflection in the glass startled her. Pale skin, tired eyes, a face that no longer looked like it belonged to the woman she'd once been. She needed air. She needed air. She needed something to quiet the ache that had taken root in her chest. The attic key lay on her table, small and rusted. She hesitated only a moment before taking it and climbing the stairs. The attic greeted her like an old memory. The smell of dust, the faint crackle of the wind pressing through the window panes. The wooden box where she'd found Clara's letters still sat in the same corner, untouched since the night she'd last opened it. But something inside her whispered now, gently and certain, "There's one more." She lifted the lid, tin. Beneath the old envelopes was a smaller piece of paper folded twice, its edges softened with time. Unlike the others, it wasn't sealed. Her breath hitched when she saw the first line written in Clara's delicate hand. To whoever finds this, or perhaps to the part of myself that I can no longer reach. Elora sank onto the floor, her heart beating unevenly. She read slowly, her voice barely a whisper in the quiet. Julian believes I belong to the sea. Maybe he's right. But what he doesn't understand is that I am not leaving him. I am becoming something he cannot hold. Love has a way of changing shape, like light passing through glass. It doesn't die. It transforms. There is someone who will come after me. She will stand where I stood, see what I saw, and carry the same ache in her heart. When he finds her, he will know, because love, even when broken, remembers its way home. Elora's hands trembled. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. The sound of the sea drifted faintly through the window, soft and rhythmic, as though answering Clara's letter with its own quiet song. She rose and moved toward the small window at the far end of the attic. The lighthouse stood against the horizon, a slender silhouette in the mist. The light turned slowly, steady now, casting its reflection across the water. Clara had written this letter for her. She was certain of it now, and yet the thought filled her not with comfort, but with sorrow. If love had truly remembered its way back, then perhaps she was never meant to find her own. She pressed her forehead against the glass, closing her eyes. What am I supposed to do with this? She whispered to no one, or perhaps to Clara herself. You left him with half a heart, and now I'm holding what's left. The floor creaked below. Me's voice carried faintly up the stairs. Elira, are you up there? Elira quickly folded the letter and slipped it into her pocket. I'm here, she called, forcing her voice to sound even. Me appeared in the doorway, her expression softening when she saw the open box. You're still chasing her ghost, she said gently. Elira shook her head. No, she said quietly. I think she's been chasing me. He frowned. You need to let this go, Elira. He's not the man you think he is. And you're not the woman she was. I know, Elira murmured. But somehow we're both caught in the space between. Me didn't understand. How could she? She hadn't felt the pull of that connection, the way the world seemed to breathe differently when Julian was near. Even now, even after the pain, she couldn't silence it. That evening, the fog rolled in thick and silver, swallowing the coastline. The lighthouse beam cut through it, a single strand of gold weaving through the gray. Elira walked down to the harbor, the letter in her pocket, burning like a secret she wasn't sure she should keep. When she reached the pier, the tide was high, the air alive with the sound of waves. She stood where she had first seen Julian step from the ferry, the same restless wind curling through her hair. The sea felt close tonight, almost sentient. She pulled out the letter, reading its last line once more. When the light finds you, do not run. It means I have kept my promise. The words trembled in her hand as a gust of wind caught the paper. Lifting it into the air, she gasped, reaching out, but the letter slipped free, carried out over the water. It danced for a moment in the glow of the lighthouse before vanishing into the mist. Elira sank to her knees on the pier, tears streaking her cheeks, the taste of salt on her lips. You kept your promise, she whispered. But what about mine? Behind her, footsteps echoed faintly against the boards. She turned, heart lurching. But it wasn't Julian. It was Havelock, the old keeper, his lantern swinging softly in the wind. His face was lined, his eyes reflecting the same light that shimmered across the sea. You shouldn't be out here, Miss Wynne, he said kindly. The tide's fierce tonight. Elira wiped her eyes, standing slowly. We needed to see the light. Havelock nodded. Aye, it's stronger now, almost as if it's found what it was looking for. He started back toward the path, but paused. Funny thing, though, he added, glancing toward the tower. When I was replacing the last of the glass, I found something behind the old lens. A letter, sealed in wax, never sent. Name on it was yours. Elira froze. Am I? He nodded, his lantern glow flickering in the fog. I left it on your doorstep. Thought it best in your hands. The world seemed to tilt the he's to you. Anna May? She barely heard him leave. Her mind filled with the echo of his words, a letter sealed in wax. As she turned toward home, the fog curled around her like a living thing, the lighthouse beams sweeping across her path. Each turn of the light felt heavier now, as if the sea itself were waiting for her to open what was meant for her all along. The letter waited for her at dawn, resting on the threshold like a ghost that had finally found its way home. The wax seal was cracked, the edges softened by time, but her name was written clearly across the front. Elira Wynne, in the same delicate hand she had seen on every letter before. She lifted it carefully, her pulse unsteady, the air around her charged with the weight of what she already knew. This was the letter Clara had meant for her, the one time had kept from reaching its destination. The wind was rising again. The first traces of a coming storm bent the trees outside, the sea turning darker by the hour. The lighthouse's beam flickered faintly against the morning sky, as though straining to hold its place between light and shadow. Elira stepped inside, clutching the letter close as rain began to patter softly against the windows. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she set it on her table beside the fading candle and stood there for a long time, staring at it, the bridge between two lives that had never truly been separate. Every instinct told her to wait for Julian, to face this together, though. But the fear that he might never come back pressed harder than her doubt. So she sat, lit the candle anew, and broke the seal. The paper was thin, the ink faint but still legible. Clara's words unfolded gently, their rhythm calm despite the storm gathering outside. Elira, if you are reading this, then the light has chosen you. Do not fear it. It has always known where to return. I saw your face in dreams long before I ever met you, a reflection in the glass of the sea, a memory of something unfinished. I could not tell Julian. He would have thought me mad. Civilly mad. But I knew the world would bend to bring you here one day. You are not my replacement, nor my shadow. You are the continuation of what love could not end. The candle's flame trembled, and Elara's breath caught. She turned the page with care, the next lines scrawled hastily, almost desperate. If he finds you, do not let guilt or time stand between you. The sea will test you. It always does. But you must stay until the light holds steady again. That is how I will know you forgave me for leaving. A gust of wind slammed against the window, rattling the glass. China glass. Elara rose, startled, clutching the letter to her chest. The storm had come faster than she expected. Outside, the horizon had vanished, swallowed by a wall of rain and mist. The lighthouse beam flashed weakly through the downpour, struggling to stay lit, and her thoughts raced. Julian, he would be there. Of course he would. He never left the lighthouse during storms. She grabbed her coat, wrapping it tightly around her, and stepped out into the wind. The rain struck her face like cold glass, her hair whipping wildly as she fought her way along the cliff path. The sound of the waves grew louder with each step, the crash of water against rock echoing through her bones. When she reached the tower, the door was half open, its hinges groaning against the wind. "Hey, Julian," she called, her voice lost in the storm. "Hey, Julian, are you here?" Lightning split the sky, illuminating the stairwell for an instant. She saw movement above, a shadow. A figure leaning against the rail. Then his voice, distant but unmistakable. "Elara, what are you doing here?" She climbed, breathless, her boots slipping on the wet iron steps. "Oh, the light. It's going out." He met her halfway, water dripping from his hair, his expression torn between relief and fear. "I told you not to come. You would have stayed alone in this." She shot back, raising her voice above the roar. At Clara's letter, he froze. "You found it." Elara nodded, pulling the soaked paper from her pocket. "She wrote to both of us, Julian. She said the sea would test us, that the light has to hold steady again. We have to finish what she started." He stared at her, his eyes glinting under the flickering lamp. "You don't understand." "The storm, it's worse than the one that took her. If the light fails, no ship will see the coast. I can't lose another life to the sea." "Ew, then let me help," she said, stepping closer. "And we can keep it burning together." He wanted to protest, but another crash of thunder drowned out his words. "Ew." They climbed the last of the stairs, reaching the lantern room. The wind howled through a cracked pane, rain sprang across the floor. The light inside flickered violently, its oil nearly spent. Elara moved to shield it with her coat, while Julian fought to secure the shutters. Every few seconds, lightning revealed their faces, his pale with exhaustion, hers illuminated by fierce determination. The storm raged as if it meant to tear the world apart. "Clara used to say the light had a soul," Julian shouted over the wind. "That if you listened closely, you could hear it breathing." Elara looked at him, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Then listen now." "It's still breathing." He turned toward her, and in that moment another flash lit the chamber. The reflection in the cracked glass behind her shimmered not with the storm, but with something softer. A faint image of a woman standing where Elara stood, her eyes calm, her hand resting on the lantern. Julian froze. "Clara," he whispered. Elara followed his gaze, and though she saw nothing clearly, she felt it. A warmth spreading through the room, the air suddenly still around them despite the storm outside. She stepped forward and placed her hand on the glass. She's not here to haunt us, Julian. Julian, she's here to finish this." He reached beside her, their hands nearly touching on the lantern frame. "Together," he said, and she nodded. The light flared, bright and golden, cutting through the storm like a heartbeat reborn. Outside, the waves crashed and retreated, their fury softening beneath the steady glow. The thunder rolled one last time, distant now, fading toward the horizon. They stood there in silence as the storm passed, the sound of the sea quieting to a gentle hum. Elara looked at Julian, his face lit by the beam's glow, his eyes glistening with something between sorrow and release. "She forgave you," Elara said softly. "She forgave both of us." Julian exhaled, his shoulders trembling. "No," he whispered. "She never needed to forgive. She just wanted us to remember." Elara reached out, her fingers brushing his hand. "Then from this moment." He nodded, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw peace settle in his eyes. The light circled once more, washing over the cliffs, over the sea, over Evermere, as if reclaiming every shadow the storm had left behind. When they finally stepped out into the dawn, the air was still, the world washed clean. The lighthouse stood unshaken, its beam unbroken, and beneath its glow, the two of them stood side by side, the sea whispering quietly below, not in warning this time, but in acceptance. The morning after the storm was eerily still. the kind of quiet that follows both endings and beginnings. The sea lay calm beneath a washed-out sky, its surface silvered by the pale light of dawn. Elora and Julian stood outside the lighthouse, their clothes still damp, their hearts still caught between what had been lost and what had been found. The light above them turned steadily now, golden and strong, as if it too had survived something sacred. For a long while, neither spoke. The sound of the sea filled the silence between them, steady, forgiving. Julian's gaze was fixed on the horizon, but his mind seemed far away, tethered to a memory he hadn't yet faced. Elora could sense it in the way his hand trembled slightly, his thumb brushing over his wedding ring as though it carried a pulse of its own for rib. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, careful. Last night, when the storm broke, I saw her. Not a shadow, not a memory, her. She was standing by the lantern watching, and for the first time, she wasn't sad. Elora's breath caught. Then she was at peace. He nodded slowly. You think she wanted to tell us something I've ignored for too long. His eyes dropped to the ring, the metal dulled with salt and years of wear. She told me, before she died, never to take it off, that it would remind me of the promise I made her. To finish the lighthouse, to keep the light alive. But I always thought that's all it meant. Elora watched him quietly, sensing the shift in his tone, that trembling edge between revelation and fear. Julian slipped the ring from his finger, holding it up to the light. After the storm, when I was alone, I noticed something. The engraving, it's deeper than I remembered. He turned it slowly, his thumb tracing the worn letters. The worn letters. Clara and Julian. That's what I always believed it said. But look closer. He handed it to her. The ring was cold in her palm, its surface etched with faint overlapping lines. She tilted it toward the light, and there, beneath the curve of his name, another letter shimmered faintly, as if hidden by time. Not a scratch, not a mistake. A name. Her name. Elora, she whispered. Her hand shook. But how? Julian's voice trembled. She had it made before she died. Said she wanted it to carry everything that mattered. I thought she meant our life together. But now I know she was preparing for something else. She asked the jeweler to add another name, one she wouldn't tell him. Said it would reveal itself when it was meant to. The world seemed to narrow around them, the sea and sky blurring together. Elora's throat tightened as she looked at the ring again, at the truth carved into metal that had outlived its maker. She knew, she said softly. She knew I would come. Julian's eyes found hers, filled with awe and disbelief. She must have. Somehow she knew you'd be the one to finish what she couldn't. The words trembled between them, fragile and electric. The air felt different now. Heavier, alive with something that neither of them could name. Elora turned the ring over in her hand, her reflection bending across its surface like a ripple in water. When I first found her letters, I thought she was warning me to stay away from you. But now I think she was leading me to you. Julian stepped closer, his voice barely above the wind. Used to... Then maybe this, he motioned between them, his breath unsteady, wasn't chance at all. For a moment, the silence deepened. The light from the tower swept over them, casting golden bands across their faces, the air shimmering with the faint hum of the sea. Elora felt the distance between them vanish, like the tide pulling two currents into one. But as the light turned again, something within Julian shifted. He looked down, Give returning to his expression, raw and human. If she knew, if she meant for this to happen, how can I not feel like I'm betraying her? Elora's eyes glistened. Because love doesn't end when one story closes, she said gently. It continues. It changes form, but it's still the same light. Clara didn't want you to stop loving. She wanted you to learn how to live again. Julian's voice broke. And you? Oh, what about me? You're the one who brought her back, he said. Through you, I've remembered everything I tried to forget. You've become the light she left behind. The wind stirred between them, carrying the scent of salt and something faintly sweet, twiled flowers from the cliffs. Elora stepped closer, her voice trembling. Then don't let it fade again. He looked at her then, really looked, as though seeing her for the first time not as a shadow or an echo, but as herself. His hand brushed her cheek, slow, uncertain. You make it sound so simple, he whispered. Maybe it is, she said, her breath unsteady. And maybe love isn't about choosing between the past and the present. Maybe it's about understanding that both can exist, that both are part of the same story. Julian's thumb brushed the tear from her face, his touch soft as a promise. He slipped the ring back onto his finger, the engraved names glinting under the light. Then let this be the story she left for us, he said quietly. And not one of endings, but of continuations. Elora smiled faintly through her tears, her voice barely audible over the distant crash of waves. Then finish it, Julian. For her. For you. For us. The light turned once more, its golden beam sweeping over the water, steady, eternal, alive. And for the first time since the storm began, the sea seemed calm, as if it too had found its peace. They stood there together beneath the tower, the ring catching the morning light, its two names no longer symbols of loss but of the way love endures, reshaped, reborn, unbroken. And as the wind carried the last trace of Claire's memory out to sea, Evermere exhaled, its silence no longer heavy but whole. The days that followed felt gentler, though the air in Evermere still carried the hush of something unfinished. The lighthouse continued to turn, its golden light steady across the horizon, a quiet heartbeat above the sea. Yet within that calm, both Julian and Elora knew something still lingered, a silence that was not yet peace, but the space before it. Julian spent the mornings by the shore, his hands rebuilding the final steps that led to the lighthouse's base, the same steps the waves had worn smooth over the years. Elora would watch from a distance, sketchbook in hand, her pencil tracing the outline of the tower, the slope of the cliff, the man who stood between them and the sea. Every stroke carried a memory that wasn't hers but felt like it could have been. Sometimes in the quiet between their words, the world seemed to bend, as if Clara's presence still moved through the wind and the waves, soft but unmistakable. It wasn't haunting now. It was something closer to gratitude. One evening, when the sun fell low and painted the water in bands of rose and gold, Elora found Julian sitting near the lantern room, the repaired glass glowing faintly beside him. He looked up when she entered, his expression calm but thoughtful. "I've been thinking," he said softly, "about what it means to forgive." Elora tilted her head, her voice gentle. "You mean Clara?" He nodded. "In myself. For so long, I thought grief was the only way to honor her. That holding on to it kept her alive somehow, but now I see it was only keeping me from living." He paused, glancing toward the horizon where the sea met the fading sky. "I keep wondering if she knew, if she wanted me to let go sooner." "She did," Elora said quietly. "That's why she left all those letters. She wanted to give you permission to remember without pain." Julian smiled faintly, though it was lined with sadness. "You sound so certain." "Because I've read her words," she replied. "She didn't want you trapped between love and guilt. She wanted you free." He looked at her then, really looked, and the silence between them softened, becoming something warm. "And you?" he asked. "What do you need to forgive?" Elora hesitated. The question settled into her chest, heavy and true. "Myself," she said finally, "for not understanding sooner. For resenting what I didn't yet know." She looked toward the light, her reflection shimmering faintly on the glass. Is full. When I first met you, I thought I was walking into someone else's story. But maybe I was meant to help it find its ending." Julian reached out, brushing his hand against hers. "Maybe it was an ending," he said. "And maybe it was just waiting for the next chapter." The simplicity of it broke something open in her, not pain, but release. She turned her palm to his, their fingers interlacing. "You said once that love changes form," she whispered. "Maybe this is what it becomes. Not loss, not longing, just understanding." He nodded slowly, his voice low. "Understanding and peace." Outside, the wind rose softly, carrying the scent of the sea through the open doorway. The light circled again, brighter now, cutting across the darkening sky. It illuminated the waves far below, the cliffs, and for a brief moment, two shadows standing hand in hand. Later, they walked down to the shore where the tide whispered against the rocks. The water shimmered with the reflection of the lighthouse, the beam stretching toward them like a bridge of gold. Julian stopped near the edge, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "There's one thing I still haven't done," he said quietly. "I never said goodbye." Elora looked at him, her heart softening. "Then say it." He drew a slow breath, his voice trembling but steady. "Clara," he began, eyes lifted toward the light. "A thank you for loving me when I didn't deserve it, and for letting me go when I couldn't let go myself. I'll keep your light alive. Not as a memory, but as a promise." As he spoke, the wind calmed, and for a moment it seemed the sea itself bowed in stillness. A single gull cried overhead, its echo fading into the horizon. Elora stepped beside him, her voice a whisper that carried through the quiet. "As she heard you." He turned to her, a tear slipping down his cheek. "Do you think she forgave me?" "She already had," Elora said. "She was just waiting for you to forgive yourself." He exhaled, the weight lifting from him in silence. When he looked at her again, his eyes were different. Softer, free in a way they had never been before. "And you?" he asked gently. "Will you stay?" Elora smiled faintly, her gaze tracing the glow of the lighthouse above them. "For as long as the light needs me," she said. The tide rose higher, brushing the hem of her dress, cool against her skin. The beams swept over them once more, painting the world in gold. And in that fleeting glow, everything felt aligned. The past, the present, the love that had transcended both. They walked back to the lighthouse in silence, the sound of the sea behind them like a lullaby. When they reached the door, Julian paused, slipping the ring from his finger once more. He placed it on the windowsill, where the light could catch it. "It belongs here now," he said. "Iwera can reflect both names." Elora nodded, her heart full. "Then let it rest." He turned to her, his hand brushing her cheek, his voice low. "I thank you for bringing me back." She leaned into his touch. "You brought yourself back. It just followed the light. Just followed the light." The lantern above them turned once more, its golden beam steady and eternal. The reflection of two souls no longer bound by grief, but by something purer. Memory, forgiveness, and the quiet strength of love that refused to end. The light over Evermere had never burned brighter. Each night its steady gold beams swept across the water, cutting through fog and darkness with the quiet resolve of something reborn. The townspeople spoke of it with reverence now, no longer a haunted place, but a guiding star. Yet for Julian and Elora, the lighthouse was no longer just a tower of stone and glass. It had become the heart of everything they had lived through. Loss, forgiveness, and the fragile beauty of what remained. Weeks had passed since that night by the shore. The sea had settled, the wind grown mild, and for the first time in years, the scent of wild lavender drifted freely through the town. Julian stayed, though he spoke less of rebuilding now and more of preserving what already was. He spent his mornings mending the last of the wooden steps, his evenings sketching designs for the new keeper's quarters near the base of the tower. Elora helped him restore the walls inside, her brushes filling the old spaces with quiet color. Soft blues, muted golds, the hues of memory and light. Yes, sometimes when the work slowed and the silence stretched between them, she would catch Julian looking at the horizon, his expression thoughtful, but no longer burdened. One evening, as the sun sank low, she found him standing at the edge of the pier, hands in his pockets, his coat fluttering in the wind. She walked to him quietly, her footsteps soft against the wood. "The new windows arrived," she said. "The glass is clear enough to see the stars through." He smiled faintly. Clara would have liked that. She always said the lighthouse should face both sky and sea. Elora's gaze followed his toward the horizon. "Do you ever think she knew this would be how it ended? That it would all lead here?" He took a deep breath, the wind ruffling his hair. Maybe she didn't need to know. Maybe love doesn't ask for endings, only continuations. She trusted the light to finish what she started. They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the waves against the rocks. The sea had its own kind of peace now, a steady rhythm like breathing. The gulls circled lazily above the cliffs, their calls distant in content. For once, everything felt perfectly still. When Julian turned to her, his eyes reflected the glow of the setting sun. "I've decided to stay," he said quietly, "and not just for the lighthouse, for Evermere, for us." Elora's chest tightened. "Is the keeper?" "I guess it's keeper," he said with a small nod. "As someone needs to make sure the light never fades again. Someone who understands what it means to lose it." He hesitated, then smiled. "And I want you here with me." Elora looked down at the water where their reflections rippled side by side. "You don't need to ask," she whispered. "I was never meant to leave." They returned to the lighthouse together as the last of the light faded from the sky. Inside, the air smelled of salt and new paint. Julian lit the lantern at the top, the golden glow spilling across the room, catching the ring that still rested on the windowsill. It glimmered faintly, the names engraved within reflecting the flame. Elora lifted it gently, tracing the letters with her thumb. It feels different now," she said softly. "It is," Julian replied. "It's no longer a promise of what was. It's a vow for what will be." He took the ring from her hand, closing it carefully in his palm. "This light has seen us through too much to ever go dark again," he said. "So tonight, I'll make sure it never does." Elora watched as he slipped the ring back onto his finger and turned toward the lantern. The flame flickered once, as though acknowledging the weight of his words. "What vow will you make?" she asked quietly. Julian looked out toward the open sea, his voice steady but low. That'll keep the light burning. For Clara, for you, for every soul that's ever found their way by it. No matter what storms come, it will never go dark again. Elora stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. And then I'll vow to keep its reflection alive. On canvas, in memory, in every color the sea gives me. Between us, it will never be forgotten. The lantern flame brightened, casting their shadows long and golden across the room. The wind brushed gently through the cracks in the window, carrying the scent of salt and lavender. Julian turned to her, his eyes soft, the kind of gaze that spoke more than words could ever hold. This is what she wanted. He said quietly, not for us to mourn her, but to continue her story. Kanatsiori. Elora smiled, her hand finding his. Then let's write it together. He nodded, and for a long time they simply stood there, two souls who had come full circle, the light turning above them in its endless rhythm. Fizzy outside, the sea murmured its approval, and the sky stretched open, clear and starlit for the first time in months. When the hour grew late, they climbed the balcony where the world met the wind. The lantern turned steadily beside them, its beam sweeping wide across the sleeping town. Julian rested his hand on the railing, his fingers brushing hers. Do you hear that? He asked. Elora tilted her head, listening. A sea? He smiled faintly. No, the quiet. It's the sound of peace. Below them, Evermere glowed faintly in the distance, its windows glimmering like scattered stars. The lighthouse stood tall against the night, its golden pulse a constant promise. And there, beneath the eternal sweep of light and the watchful gaze of the sea, Julian made his vow. Silent but unbroken, carried forward in every turn of the lantern. He would keep it burning, always. Years passed quietly in Evermere, as years often do in places that learn to live between memory and peace. The town changed, as all things must, but the lighthouse remained. Steadfast on its cliff, its golden beams sweeping across the water like a heartbeat that had outlasted time itself. The sea no longer raged the way it once had. It had grown calm, reflective, as though it too had learned to forgive. Julie and Elora lived in the keeper's house below the tower, its walls warmed with sunlight, and a scent of salt and paint. The once abandoned rooms were now alive with the hum of life. Sketches pinned to the walls, brushes drying by the window, books stacked beside a kettle that always seemed to sing before dawn. Some evenings, the townsfolk would see the two figures walking along the cliffs together, his coat dark against the wind, her shawl bright as the last light of day. They seldom spoke of the past anymore. The lighthouse itself carried that memory. In its glass, its rusted railings, its steady glow. Yet sometimes, when the night was particularly still and the sea stretched endless beneath the moon, Elora would glance toward the top of the tower and imagine Clara there, not as a ghost, but as light, watching, smiling, at peace. The locals said the tower was blessed now. Cheers now. That no matter the weather, its flame never faltered. Sailors used it as their North Star, the Evermere light, they called it, a name that found its way into stories told far beyond the town. Children born after the storm grew up hearing about the painter and the keeper who had rebuilt the tower in each other, their love woven into the tides themselves. On quiet mornings, Elora would set her easel near the window and paint the sea. The same scene always. The horizon stretching endlessly, the faint glow of dawn where sky met water. But each canvas was different. Some were soft and golden, others gray and heavy with mist. When Julian passed by, he would pause, smiling, and ask, "Which one is this?" And she would answer, "The same one, just a different light." He'd kiss her forehead, the years having softened both their faces but not their eyes. "You've made it eternal," he would say. "No," she'd reply gently. "It already was. We just remembered it." In the evenings, they would climb the spiral staircase to the lantern room. The climb was slower now, but neither minded. At the top, they would stand together in silence as the lantern turned, its rhythmic sweep painting the room in warm gold. The wind outside always carried the same scent, a blend of salt and lavender, timeless and familiar. Julian would rest his hand on the glass, the same glass she had helped him restore so long ago. "He used to think the light belonged to her," he said once, his voice low. "Then I thought it belonged to us. But I think now it belongs to everyone who ever needed to find their way." Elora smiled, her reflection shimmering faintly beside his. "And maybe it always will." The night beyond them deepened, the sea stretching vast and endless, the stars reflected on its surface like scattered lanterns. Somewhere far below, the tide whispered against the rocks, the eternal sound of arrival and return. One evening, many years later, long after the town had changed hands, and time had carried away the faces of those who remembered the storm. A young couple arrived Evermere. They were travelers, newly married, searching for quiet after the noise of the world. The innkeeper told them to visit the lighthouse at dusk, said it was tradition for those who believed in love that endures. So they went, hand in hand, walking the same path Elora once had. The cliffs glowed amber under the setting sun, the waves calm, the wind whispering through the tall grass. When they reached the top, they found the lighthouse still standing strong, its beams sweeping out to sea in perfect rhythm. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paint and old wood. The walls were covered with framed paintings, scenes of the sea, the cliffs, and always the light. At the bottom of one, painted in delicate gold, were the initials EW. The woman brushed her fingers over them. Who was she? She asked softly. The caretaker, an older man who had followed them up, smiled. She was the painter who lived here with the last keeper. They say their love kept the light alive. The woman smiled, her gaze lifting to the beam above them. It's still beautiful. It always will be, the man said, because they built it out of memory, not stone. The couple stepped outside as night fell, the sea glowing faintly beneath the moonlight. The beam swept across them once, then again, a pulse of gold that felt almost alive. They stood together for a long while, watching it move beyond the sea, until it disappeared into the horizon. In that moment, time felt suspended, as if the world itself remembered the vow once made here, a promise that light, once kindled by love, never truly dies. Never truly dies. Far below, on the windowsill of the keeper's house, the ring still rested, untouched, unclaimed, its two names worn smooth by years of salt and air. And when the lantern's glow passed over it, the metal shimmered softly, as though acknowledging the truth it had always carried. Love endures. Love transforms, love remembers, and somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, love began again.